Hello, my name is Jamie Goggins, and in this short presentation I'm going to explain what is a carbon footprint. I'll explain what it does measure, and more so what it misses. Give a brief history and the progress of the carbon footprinting. We'll outline some reporting standards for carbon footprinting. And, as I'm based in Ireland, give an overview of the emissions in Ireland. We'll consider why do we do carbon footprint, and what comes after the carbon footprint. The concept of the carbon footprint is a measure of the total amount of greenhouse gas emitted due to human activities. Carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas, followed by methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. In the carbon footprint report, all of these gases are added up and converted into the same unit, this being carbon dioxide equivalent. The carbon footprint is used to assess the global warming potential of various activities, products, or organizations as a way to measure their contribution to climate change. An important thing to note about the carbon footprint is that global warming is only one aspect of the climate and biodiversity crisis that the world is facing. So, the carbon footprint is a valuable tool for quantifying and managing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with human activities, but also only one piece of the broader environmental puzzle. To comprehensively address environmental impacts, there are more holistic approaches to consider other effects such as ecology, social, and resource use. So what does a carbon footprint measure and what does it miss? What a carbon footprint measures includes direct emissions, indirect emissions, and carbon intensity. Direct emissions include emissions from activities such as burning fossil fuels for transportation, heating, and electricity generation. Indirect emissions are emissions associated with the production and transportation of goods and services consumed by individuals or organizations, including supply chain emissions. Carbon intensity, the carbon footprint measures the amount of CO2 and other greenhouse gases emitted per unit of a specific activity or product, often expressed in units like kilograms of CO2 per mile travelled or per product unit. What the carbon footprint doesn't measure, it doesn't measure non-CO2 greenhouse gases, it doesn't measure ecological and biodiversity impact, it doesn't measure resource depletion, neither does it measure social and economic impacts, or does it measure feedback loops. So what are these? Well, the non-CO2 greenhouse gases. While the carbon footprint primarily focuses on CO2 emissions, it may not account for other potential greenhouse gas emissions like methane or nitrous oxide, which have shorter atmospheric lifetimes but significantly higher global warming potentials. In terms of ecological and biodiversity impact, the carbon footprint does not directly measure the impact of these emissions on ecosystems, wildlife, or biodiversity loss, even though climate change can have profound effects on these aspects. In terms of resource depletion, it doesn't account for the depletion of non-renewable resources, such as minerals and water, or their impacts on ecosystems. The carbon footprint alone doesn't capture the social economic consequences of emissions, such as health impacts, displacement, or economic inequalities related to climate change. In terms of the feedback loop, it may not fully account for potential feedback loops in the climate system, where warming can trigger further emissions, such as permafrost thaw. The term carbon footprint gained prominence in the early 2000s as a way to quantify the environmental impact of human activities. It was popularized by environmentalists and organizations seeking to raise awareness about climate change. Over time, standardized methods for calculating carbon footprints were developed, such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which provides guidelines for businesses and individuals to measure and report their emissions. Many companies started calculating and reporting their carbon footprints as part of sustainability efforts. This led to a growing awareness of the need to reduce emissions and increase energy efficiency. Carbon footprint labeling on products, along with carbon calculators for individuals, became more common. This helped consumers make environmentally informed choices. Governments worldwide began to introduce policies and regulations aimed at reducing carbon emissions, often using carbon footprint data to set targets and incentives. Advances in technology led to better measurement and monitoring of emissions, including the use of remote sensing, satellite data, and more precise emissions factors. Reporting standards play a crucial role in harmonising greenhouse gas emissions reporting, ensuring transparency, and facilitating emissions reduction efforts by organisations and governments worldwide. They help track progress towards climate goals and support informed decision-making. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol Corporate Standard is a widely recognised and globally adopted framework for accounting and reporting greenhouse gas emissions. It was developed by the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It provides guidelines for organisations to measure and report the greenhouse gas emissions, encompassing both direct, which is Scope 1, and indirect, which is Scope 2 and 3 emissions. These include emissions from operations, energy consumption, and supply chains. The standard offers flexibility to organisations in choosing how to measure and report emissions, making it adaptable to various sectors and industries. Emissions are typically reported in various categories, including energy, transportation, the supply chain, and more. This allows organisations to identify emission hotspots and develop strategies for reduction. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol Corporate Standard is widely accepted by governments, businesses, and NGOs as a common framework for carbon accounting and reporting. There are many other widely used standards for greenhouse gas emissions reporting. For example, the ISO 14064 standard series provides a set of internationally recognized standards for greenhouse gas accounting and verification. ISO 14064 Part 1 outlines principles and requirements for quantifying and reporting emissions, while ISO 14064 Part 2 focuses on projects, and ISO 14064 Part 3 covers validation and verification. Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP, is a global environmental disclosure platform that encourages companies, cities, and regions to report their environmental impacts, including greenhouse gas emissions. CDP's reporting framework is widely used by investors and purchasers to assess environmental risks and opportunities. Focused in the United States, the Climate Registry is a non-profit organisation that helps organisations report and verify the greenhouse gas emissions data. It provides a consistent platform for emissions reporting across various sectors. The emissions trading scheme in Europe, called the EU ETS, or the EU emissions trading system, is a mandatory emissions trading system in the European Union, which covers a range of industries, particularly power generation and heavy industries. It sets a cap on emissions and allows trading of emission allowances, encouraging emission reductions. While not a standard in the traditional sense, science-based targets, or SBTs, provide a framework for companies to align their emission reductions targets with the latest climate science. This approach ensures that emission reductions are in line with the goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Many countries and regions have their own greenhouse gas reporting and reduction programs, such as the United States EPA mandatory reporting rule, or the United Kingdom streamlined energy and carbon reporting framework. Various standards exist for carbon offset projects, such as the Verified Carbon Standard, or VCS, and the Gold Standard. These standards ensure the credibility and quality of carbon offset projects, which aim to reduce emissions or remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions in 2022 are estimated to be 60.76 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is 1.9% lower, or 1.19 megatons of CO2 equivalent, than emissions in 2021. This follows a 5.1% increase in the emissions reported for 2021 from 2020. Emissions in 2022 are 4.6 below pre-COVID 2019 figures. Decreased emissions in 2022 compared to 2021 were observed in the largest sector except for transport, waste, and commercial services. These three sectors show increase in emissions of between up to 6%, which are highlighted in red in the emissions change 2021-2022 table here in this figure. So why bother carrying out a carbon footprint? Conducting a carbon footprint assessment is a proactive and strategic approach that helps organisations address a wide range of environmental, economic, and social challenges. It not only supports sustainability goals, but also enhances competitiveness, reduces costs, and strengthens an organisation's overall resilience in a changing world. Another major reason to conduct a carbon footprint assessment is because a carbon footprint baseline is needed in order to create a decarbonisation strategy for an organisation. There are also direct financial savings associated with cutting carbon. for example, cutting bills from heating, electricity and travel. There's also government grants available for various sustainability initiatives. There can be market benefits and also potential future in carbon taxing. For example, the EU carbon price is currently around €65 per tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent. If we take the University of Galway as an example, the baseline carbon footprint for the university is about 45 kilotons of CO2. So if we're trying to offset the carbon for the university, it costs about €22.9 million every year. We could see carbon taxing making its way into various industries in the future. What other benefits? Well, there's many other benefits as well, such as many organisations undertake carbon footprint assessment as part of their commitment to environmental stewardship. By quantifying and understanding their greenhouse gas emissions, they can take steps to reduce their environmental impact and contribute to mitigating climate change. In some regions, governments and regulatory bodies mandate emissions reporting and reductions. Organisations may conduct assessments to ensure compliance with these legal requirements, avoiding potential fines and penalties. Reducing energy consumption and emissions often leads to cost savings. Energy efficient practices and emission reductions can result in lower utility bills, reduce fuel consumption, and decrease waste disposal costs. Climate change poses various risks to businesses, such as supply chain disruptions, extreme weather events, and changing consumer preferences. Identifying and addressing emissions can help organisations mitigate these risks and enhance their resilience. Many consumers and investors prioritise sustainability and environmental response practices. A carbon footprint assessment can provide evidence of an organisation's commitment to sustainability, making it more appealing to environmentally conscious customers and investors. Organisations that proactively manage their carbon footprint can gain a competitive advantage in markets where sustainability is a differentiator. This can lead to increased market share and improved brand perception. Understanding where and how emissions occur in an organisation's operations allow for identification of inefficiencies. Addressing these inefficiencies can improve overall operational efficiencies and reduce waste. Assessing emissions within the supply chain helps organisations identify opportunities for collaboration with suppliers to reduce emissions collectively. This can enhance the overall sustainability of the supply chain. Reducing energy and resource consumption not only reduces emissions, but also conserves valuable resources like water and raw materials. This contributes to long-term resource security. Stakeholders, including employees, customers, and investors, increasingly expect organisations to take responsibility for the environmental impact. A carbon footprint assessment helps meet these expectations. The assessment process often drives innovation and research into cleaner technologies and more sustainable practices. This can lead to the development of new products and services. Transparent reporting of carbon emissions allows organisations to communicate their efforts to reduce their environmental impact. It builds trust with stakeholders and helps in long-term sustainability planning. Many organisations align with international agreements and initiatives such as the Paris Agreement by setting emission target reductions and reporting and progress. Carbon footprint assessments are essential for tracking these commitments. It is possible to carry out a traffic light report in-house without the need for hiring external expertise. The goal of the traffic light report is to give companies an indication as to what their next best steps may be and whether external expertise is needed. This could be a full carbon footprint report or life cycle assessment of certain products, or an energy management plan, and so on. This will depend on the results of the initial traffic light assessment. The final goal is, of course, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, preferably before carbon taxes come into play, so that your organisation is ahead on this front. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions requires the creation of a pathway to net zero or decarbonisation plan based off the baseline carbon footprint. The pathway will be determined by companies' own goals in terms of how quickly it wants to decarbonise. Once a pathway is set, this can be used to create a climate action plan, which translates the goals set by the pathway into a step-by-step process, generally broken into quarterly targets.